Imagine waking up one day to find that every major power on Earth has collapsed. Cities abandoned, trade routes silent, writing systems forgotten. This isn't science fiction. This actually happened 3,200 years ago, and historians still can't fully explain why. Welcome to the Bronze Age collapse, the most mysterious catastrophe in human history. Around 1200 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to the most advanced civilizations humanity had ever created. The Mycenaean Greeks built magnificent palaces and traded across vast distances. The Hittite Empire controlled modern-day Turkey with an army that rivaled Egypt's military might. The Egyptians themselves were at the height of their power under Ramesses the Great. Meanwhile, wealthy port cities dotted the coastlines, and merchant ships carried copper, tin, olive oil, and grain across the sea. International diplomacy flourished, with kings writing letters to each other like old friends. This interconnected world was more sophisticated than anything that would exist again for over 1,000 years. Then, in the span of just 50 years, it all came crashing down. The collapse began around 1200 BCE, and by 1150 BCE, the world was unrecognizable. The Hittite Empire vanished so completely that we didn't even know it existed until archaeologists rediscovered it in the early 20th century. Mycenaean Greece fell into a dark age so profound that the Greeks forgot how to write for 400 years. Major cities across the region show evidence of violent destruction. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, was burned and abandoned. Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos in Greece met similar fates. Ugarit, a prosperous port city in modern Syria, was destroyed so suddenly that archaeologists found a clay tablet in the ruins describing ships of enemies approaching, a final desperate message never sent. If you're fascinated by these ancient mysteries, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're exploring the greatest enigmas of human history, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, you might think such a widespread catastrophe must have had one clear cause, but here's where it gets really interesting. Scholars have debated this for decades, and the truth seems to be a perfect storm of disasters hitting all at once. First, there were the Sea Peoples, mysterious invaders whose origins remain unknown to this day. Egyptian records describe massive attacks by foreign warriors and their families, arriving by land and sea. The pharaoh Ramesses III claimed to have defeated them, but the victory was Pyrrhic. Egypt survived but emerged weakened, impoverished, and unable to maintain its empire. But the Sea Peoples weren't just random raiders. Some scholars believe they were refugees themselves, displaced by other catastrophes. Which brings us to the second factor, climate change. Recent archaeological evidence, including analysis of pollen samples in ancient texts describing drought, suggests the Eastern Mediterranean experienced a severe, prolonged dry period beginning around 1200 BCE. Harvests failed, populations couldn't be fed. The complex trade networks that sustained the Bronze Age civilizations required stability, and climate disaster shattered that stability. When crops fail, governments fall. Third, there was systems collapse. The Bronze Age world was remarkably interconnected, which was both its greatest strength and its fatal weakness. These civilizations depended on long-distance trade for essential resources. Bronze itself required copper and tin, often sourced from hundreds or even thousands of miles apart. When trade routes were disrupted, whether by invaders, pirates, or starving populations turning to raiding, the entire economic system began to fail. It was like pulling one card from a house of cards. One palace falls, its trading partners lose essential goods, their economies weaken, making them vulnerable to attack or revolt, and the cascade continues. Some historians have compared it to the 2008 financial crisis, where interconnected systems meant that problems in one area rapidly spread everywhere. Fourth, there's evidence of earthquakes. The Eastern Mediterranean sits on active fault lines, and some researchers have found evidence of a literal earthquake storm, a series of major quakes striking over several decades. Destroyed cities, disrupted agriculture, and broken infrastructure would have made societies vulnerable to everything else going wrong simultaneously. But here's perhaps the most chilling part. We have very few written records from the actual collapse. The civilizations that fell were literate, they kept extensive records, but as they collapsed, writing largely disappeared. It's as if the lights of civilization were simply switched off. The Mycenaean Greeks forgot Linear B script entirely. It wouldn't be deciphered until 1952, over 3,000 years later. The successor to these Bronze Age societies, the early Greeks of the Dark Age, had no memory of the great palaces and empires that came before. When Homer composed the Iliad and the Odyssey around 400 years after the collapse, describing grand palaces and powerful kings, later Greeks thought these were pure fantasy. They had no idea Homer was describing a real, lost world. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us how fragile civilization can be. These weren't primitive societies. They had writing, complex governments, international diplomacy, advanced metallurgy, and sophisticated architecture. Yet within a human lifetime, it all vanished. Perhaps most importantly, the collapse teaches us about interconnectedness. In our modern globalized world, we depend on complex systems just like the Bronze Age civilizations did. Supply chains span continents. Financial systems link every economy. Climate change threatens agricultural stability. The parallels are uncomfortable, but worth considering. The ancient world eventually recovered. From the ashes of the Bronze Age arose classical Greece, the Persian Empire, and eventually Rome. But it took centuries, and the recovery followed a very dark age indeed. If this deep dive into ancient history captivated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of the mysteries that shaped our world. Which aspect of the Bronze Age collapse intrigues you most? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.